Welcome to Evolved Sun. I'm Matt Finch, your host, and in today's episode, you're going to learn detailed info on the Veil of Forgetting, including an overview on the Veil of Forgetfulness, the history of the Veil of Forgetting, what life was like pre-Veil, and what life is like post-Veil, what the main differences are in post-Veil living, how to penetrate the Veil of Forgetting, and much more. I'm going to be using as a resource today the Raw Contact Resource Series, a concept guide by Gary Bean of LL Research. It is very detailed and really mind-blowing and mind-expanding as well. So basically how it works is reincarnation is real. There are 7 densities of our octave of creation, and right now Earth humanity, we are 3rd density mind-body-spirit complices. Out of the 7 densities, 3rd density is the only density of reincarnation that has the Veil of Forgetfulness. The Veil of Forgetfulness is a feature of souls reincarnating on Earth and other 3rd density planets. 3rd density is the only dimension of soul evolution that we have the Veil of Forgetting. This veil is between the conscious mind and also the unconscious mind, and it prevents incarnating mind-body-spirit complices on 3D planets from remembering our past lives in space-time and our life between lives in time-space. According to Ra, a 6th-density social memory complex entity in the Law of One channeling material from the early 1980s done by LL Research, Don Elkins the Questioner, Carla Rucker the Telepathic Trance Channel Instrument, and Jim McCarty the Scribe, a previous iteration of the Logos didn't have the Veil of Forgetfulness in 3D planets like Earth and the others. Ra states that the Logos created the veil because the mind-body spirits were taking too long to progress from 3rd to 4th density. And since they didn't have a veil blocking their access to the unconscious mind, they remembered that all is one, all life is one. Everyone and everything is the one infinite creator. So basically, life was mostly harmonious and blissful the majority of the time. They had the memory of past lives in 3D space-time, as well as their memory of life between lives in 3D time-space. And while this was a blissful experience for most mind-body spirits, since things were so easy and so loving, due to them knowing they were all a subdivision of the one infinite creator and all immortal souls, there was not sufficient reason or will or faith or catalyst or pain or suffering, etc., for them to evolve spiritually and progress. So many were staying stuck in perpetual 3D life in the 3D reincarnation cycle. And apparently, the Logos decided to switch things up and install the Veil of Forgetfulness. I guess the Logos was getting too bored watching things be so easy and harmonious and lacking sufficient progress in a timely manner. After installing the Veil of Forgetfulness in 3rd density, this created a lot of polarity and the ability for mind-body-spirit complices to polarize on the positive path of service to others or the negative path of service to self. In our current iteration of 3rd density Earth and the Veil of Forgetting, we are extremely veiled here. We're double or triple veiled. So we have the veil, which is the blocking of our subconscious mind. We have access to our conscious mind and we have access to intuition, but we don't have much access to the unconscious or subconscious mind. That is the place that holds all of our memories of our past lives and all of our time life between lives, between incarnations in time-space. Additionally, we are a bipedal, great ape-developed mind-body-spirit complex species, and we have opposable thumbs as well. So not only do we have a veil separating the conscious from our unconscious minds, but we also were very likely to develop speech versus telepathic communication, and since we have opposable thumbs, it was almost guaranteed that we would develop and evolve to make and use tools and weapons and technology. So Earth is a heavily veiled experience in 3rd density. And unfortunately, since most mind-body-spirit complices on present-day Earth are unaware that we are all one and each of us is a small wave in the ocean, yet part of the ocean of consciousness nonetheless, that has resulted in many having to reincarnate on 3D Earth over and over again, with very few graduating to 4th density positive or 4th density negative planets. The Veil of Forgetfulness makes life on Earth much harder to be sure. However, it provides exponentially more catalyst and ability to polarize compared to more dense densities of incarnation. And with that being said, now let's get into the highly technical, very detailed information on the veil of forgetting, life pre-veil, life post-veil, and much more. The veil of forgetting. Much earlier in our universe's or octave's history, as we would conceive of time, the logoi of that era conceived of a great experiment. They designed something that had never been seen. A semi-permeable veil that would separate the conscious from the unconscious mind, making the latter relatively more mystery-filled, obscuring it from the awareness of the conscious mind. This experimental action had far-reaching consequences that continue to shape our present experience, including one of the chief characteristics of our lives, the conscious forgetting of everything that occurred before the incarnation, along with our innate selfhood as the one infinite creator. Ross says, the primary veiling was of such significance that it may be seen to be analogous to the mantling of the earth over all the jewels within the earth's crust. Whereas previously all facets of the creator were consciously known, after the veiling almost no facets of the creator were known to the mind. Almost all was buried beneath the veil. With the implementation of the veil, the mind-body-spirit became, in Ra's technical term, the mind-body-spirit complex. The mind was declared to be complex, which, in turn, caused the body and the spirit to become complex. Also, though unanticipated when the veil was first conceived, the service to self-polarity was born, initiating the polarization in consciousness that would become the main driver of spiritual evolution in this octave, becoming complex and extending free will. In subsequent sections, we will examine life before and after the veil, along with why it was devised in the first place. But first, a technical section. Prior to the veil, the archetypal blueprint of the mind consisted of 9 archetypes: matrix, potentiator, and significator for mind, body, and spirit. These were the archetypal foundations of the mind-body-spirit, which was not complex. From the standpoint of these original archetypes, the veil was placed between the matrix of mind, what we now call the conscious mind, and the potentiator of mind, what we now call the unconscious mind. In the pre-veiled mind, there was no partition between the two. The unconscious was fully known and accessible for use by the conscious mind, as was the body. The third density experience was singular and monochrome, in other words, not complex. Ross said, let us illustrate pre-veiled third density life by observing the relative harmony and unchanging quality of existence in one of your, as you call it, primitive tribes. The entities have the concepts of lawful and taboo, but the law is inexorable and all events occur as predestined. There is no concept of right and wrong, good or bad. It is a culture in monochrome. To be complex, Ross says, is to consist of more than one characteristic element or concept. And toward that end, the advent of the veil partitioned the conscious mind from the deep mind, thus rendering the deep mind unconscious. Through the subtle movements of the conscious and unconscious mind, the significator then became complex, gaining free will in the variety that we know it, along with the possibility of becoming that which is not. Consequently, over a lengthy period of time, 13 more archetypes evolved, including 3 sets of catalyst, experience, transformation, and great way, and a final new archetype, the choice, extending free will. The difference between a mind-body-spirit and a mind-body-spirit complex is, as Ross says, a forgetting within the deeper mind. That forgetting grants post-veiled entities greater range or freedom for their will to reach, or it grants greater confusion, as you prefer. Prior to the forgetting, the pre-veiled third-density entities did not enjoy the free will, confusion, that we now experience in the post-veiled third density. In this experiment, then, free will itself was extended downward and outward from the logoi at the level of the sun body to all sublogoi at the level of third density, mind, body, spirit complexes. Prior to this moment, logoi had simply not conceived of this possibility, and in the environment of absence of free will, the only polarity available was service to others. To be complex is also to be a self which is a composite of parts, where one part of the self can think or feel differently than another. One part of the self can be compartmentalized or suppressed. One part can predominate and become imbalanced with the others. One part can sabotage the whole. 2 or more parts can be in conflict and hold mutually conflicting truths. and we can consequently be confused by what we really desire. Thus, not only does the self become complex, but free will, or confusion, is extended. Thus, the creator has a more vivid, varied, and intense experience of creator by creator, as there are more pieces, shapes, and colors in the cosmic kaleidoscope, poetically speaking. The seeker, once awakened, then, embarks upon a journey of synthesis through knowing, accepting, forgiving, and balancing these seeming parts into an integrated self. Why the veil? The purpose of the third density incarnation was then, as it is now, to learn the way of love. But the pre-veiled third density entities of the time lacked the strength of will or the impetus to move, to work, to learn. Ra says, that which even the most highly sophisticated, in your terms, societal structure lacked, given the non-complex nature of its entities, was what you might call will, or, to use a more plebeian term, gusto or élan vital. There was little enough tendency for experience to polarize entities that entities repeated habitually the third density cycles many times over. In the quote above, Ra mentions that the pre-veiled entities still needed to polarize. How could third density entities polarize and graduate into fourth density without the possibility of choosing service to others or service to self? Ra said, the necessity for graduation to fourth density is an ability to use, welcome, and enjoy a certain intensity of the white light of the one infinite creator. Prior to the veiling process, the measurement would be that of an entity walking up a set of your stairs, each of which was imbued with a certain quality of light. The stair upon which an entity stopped would be either third density light or fourth density light. Between the two stairs lies the threshold. To cross that threshold is difficult. There is resistance at the edge, shall we say, of each density. The faculty of faith or will needs to be understood, nourished, and developed in order to have an entity which seeks past the boundary of third density. Those entities which do not do their homework, be they ever so amiable, shall not cross. It was this situation which faced the logoi prior to the veiling process being introduced into the experiential continuum of third density. In the above, we get to why the logoi conceived of the novel idea of separating the conscious from the unconscious mind. The third density entities of that time were not doing their work. As Ra says below, consider, if you will, the tendency of those who are divinely happy, as you call this distortion, to have little urge to alter or better their condition. Such is the result of the mind-body-spirit which is not complex. There is the possibility of love of other selves and service to other selves, but there is the overwhelming awareness of the Creator in the self. The connection with the Creator is that of the umbilical cord. The security is total. Therefore, no love is terribly important, no pain terribly frightening, no effort, therefore, is made to serve for love or to benefit from fear. Even though these pre-veiled entities had awareness of the purpose and objective of the third density curriculum, Ra says, let us continue the metaphor of the schooling, but consider the scholar of being an entity in your younger years of the schooling process. The entity is fed, clothed, and protected regardless of whether or not the schoolwork is accomplished. Therefore, the entity does not do the homework, but rather enjoys playtime, mealtime, and vacation. It is not until there is a reason to wish to excel that most entities will attempt to excel. As Ra says in 82.24, where there has been no harm, there need be no healing, and without the need to understand, understanding would forever be left undone. And in 54.3, a similar spirit. In order to progress, a state of some dissatisfaction will be present, thus giving the entity the stimulus for further seeking. Pre-veil, the good life. Dawn explored several other topics pertaining to life before the veil in third density. They include disease. Before the veil, disease was not the catalyst it is today. It had the benign function of ending the incarnation at an appropriate time so that a new incarnation could be subsequently begun. Ra says, the third density is, by its very fiber, a societal one. There are societies wherever there are entities conscious of the self and conscious of other selves, and possessed with intelligence adequate to process information, indicating the benefits of communal blending of energies. The structures of society before as after veiling were various. However, the societies before veiling did not depend in any case upon the intentional enslavement of some for the benefit of others, this not being seen to be a possibility when all are seen as one. There was, however, the requisite amount of disharmony to produce various experiments in what you may call governmental or societal structures. Body. In pre-veiled conditions, third-density entities had full awareness of and control over all bodily functions that are currently involuntary or unconscious, including the heartbeat, blood pressure, and the intensity of pain. Sexuality. Ra says the path of energy transfer before the veiling during the sexual intercourse was that of the two entities possessed of green ray capability. The awareness of all as creator is that which opens the green energy center. Thusly, there was no possibility of blockage due to the sure knowledge of each by each that each was the creator. The transfers were weak due to the ease with which such transfers could take place between any two polarized entities during sexual intercourse. Before the veiling, sexual energy transfer was always possible due to there being no shadow upon the grasp of the nature of the body and its relationship to other entities. However, before the veiling process, there was a near total lack of the use of this sexual energy transfer beyond green ray. Magical ability. Magical ability is the ability to consciously use the so-called unconscious. Therefore, there was maximal ability prior to the innovation of Sublogoi's free will. Post-veil, the frequently unpleasant life. Implementation of the veil resulted immediately in the emergence of both service to self and service to others polarities. From that early stage until now, many successive experiments have refined the veil and the archetypal mind to bring us to the present space-time nexus of Earth, far into the development of the veil. We will look at 9 different categories Don and Ra explored that make our present experience qualitatively different from that of our original pre-veiled brothers and sisters. Will, or pure desire. Ra identifies the faculty of will, or pure desire, as perhaps the most important and significant product of the veiling. Third-density beings now have a much stronger desire to grow, to learn, to serve. Suffering is an important motivator, and polarity is a key driver. Space-time segregated from time-space. The veil is not a time-space but a space-time phenomenon. In the realm of time-space, including deep dreaming, the inner planes, and the pre-incarnational realm, there is no veil. But because of the veil, Ra says space-time is the only obvious possibility for experience. Without the veil, the mind was not caught in your illusory time. Far-seeing. Ra describes the pre-veiled mind as one that relied directly on unspoken concepts, whereas post-veil, the conscious mind must attempt to access, name, and describe, or give shape to, those concepts. Removed from the constant, immediate experience of the unconscious mind, the conscious mind must now rely on mental processes, symbolism, and language to conceive of its functions. Ra said, if one were to attempt to list those functions of mind most significant in that they might be of aid in polarization, one would need to begin with the faculty of visioning, envisioning, or far-seeing. Don asks, what is meant by far-seeing? And Ra responds, your language is not overstrewn with non-emotional terms for the functional qualities of what is now termed the unconscious mind. The nature of the unconscious is of the nature of concept rather than word. Consequently, before the veiling, the use of the deeper mind was that of the use of unspoken concept. You may consider the emotive and connotative aspects of a melody. One could call out, in some stylized fashion, the terms for the notes of the melody. One could say, a quarter note A, a quarter note A, a quarter note A, whole note F. This bears little resemblance to the beginning of the melody of one of your composer's most influential melodies, that known to you as a symbol of victory. This is the nature of the deeper mind. There are only stylized methods with which to discuss its functions. Thusly, our descriptions of this portion of the mind, as well as the same portions of body and spirit, were given terms such as far-seeing, indicating that the nature of penetration of the veiled portion of the mind may be likened unto the journey too rich and exotic to contemplate adequate describing thereof. Dreams and the higher self. Before the veil, dreams were not used to communicate content from the subconscious mind, but were used in its environment for receiving teaching from inner planes and higher density sources. With the unconscious separated from the conscious, dreaming took on an entirely new meaning. becoming an activity in which there is made a finely wrought and excellently fashioned bridge from conscious to unconscious. Dreaming now offers material which, if comprehended by the conscious mind, can greatly aid in polarization. Slavery. In pre-veiled existence, there was no such thing as unconscious or conscious slavery. That is, entities did not inadvertently enslave one another whilst ignorant of infringement upon free will. In the post-veiled world, however, Ra says, at the present space-time, the condition of well-meant and unintentional slavery are so numerous that it beggars our ability to enumerate them. Pain and catalyst. Whereas pain was something of a practical signal giving the entity helpful information about navigating their environment, now it is a significant catalyst for spiritual evolution. When Dawn asks about the apparent overabundance of pain and people not seeming to make use of it, Ra replies, "You may see in some cases an entity which, either by pre-incarnative choice or by constant reprogramming while in incarnation, has developed an esurient program of catalyst. Such an entity is quite desirous of using the catalyst and has determined to its own satisfaction that what you may call the large board needs to be applied to the forehead in order to obtain the attention of the self. In these cases, it may indeed seem a great waste of the catalyst of pain, and a distortion towards feeling the tragedy of so much pain may be experienced by the other self. However, it is well to hope that the other self is grasping that which it has gone to some trouble to offer itself, that is, the catalyst which it desires to use for the purpose of evolution. Body. It took many successive experiments to determine which functions of the body should be delegated to the conscious and unconscious minds. We in our present third density are at a very fine-tuned state, presumably, resulting in many of the potentials and functions of the body complex being hidden from the conscious mind. Ra said, the third function of the mind which is significant and which has been veiled is that of the knowing of the body. The knowledge of and control over the body, having been lost to a great extent in the veiling process, is thusly lost from the experience of the seeker. Its knowledge before the veiling is of small use. Its knowledge after the veiling, and in the face of what is now a dense illusion of separation of body complex from mind complex, is quite significant. The body complex as a whole is greatly misunderstood due to the post-veiling assumption that the physical manifestation called the body is subject only to physical stimuli. This is emphatically not so. Sexual energy transfer. In the third density, entities are attempting to learn the ways of love. If it can be seen that all are one being, as happens without the veil, it becomes much more difficult for the undisciplined personality to choose one mate and, thereby, initiate itself into a program of service. It is much more likely that the sexual energy will be dissipated more randomly, without either great joy or great sorrow, depending from these experiences. Therefore, the green ray energy transfer, being almost without exception the case in sexual energy transfer prior to the veiling, remains weakened and without significant crystallization. The sexual energy transfers and blockages after veiling may be seen to be a more complex study, but one far more efficient in crystallizing those who seek the green ray energy center. After the veiling process, it became infinitely more difficult to achieve green ray energy transfer due to the great areas of mystery and unknowing concerning the body complex and its manifestations. However, also due to the great shadowing of the manifestations of the body from the conscious mind complex, when such energy transfer was experienced, it was likelier to provide catalyst, which caused a bonding of self with other self in a properly polarized configuration. From this point, it was far more likely that higher energy transfers would be sought by this mated pair of mind-body-spirit complices, thus allowing the Creator to know itself with great beauty and wonder. Intelligent infinity having been reached by this sacramental use of this function of the body, each mind-body-spirit complex of the mated pair gained greatly in polarization and in ability to serve. As mind-body-spirit complices begin to use the sexual energy transfer to learn, to serve, and to glorify the one infinite Creator, the function of the female orgasm becomes more clear. You are correct in assuming that the energy of which we speak in discussing sexual energy transfers is a form of vibratory bridge between space-time and time-space. and due to the veiling process, the energy transferred from male to female is different than that transferred from female to male. Individual logoic refinement. Ra indicates that usage of the veil has undergone further experimentation and refinement by innumerable logoi since its inception. In this open-ended experiment, each logos, like our sun, is free to further tweak the parameters of the veil's implementation in its respective archetypal blueprint of the mind. Ra said, "We are not entirely sure why our logos and several neighboring logoi chose the bipedal erect form of second-density apes to invest. It has been our supposition, which we share with you as long as you are aware that this is mere opinion, that our logos was interested in, shall we say, further intensifying the veiling process by offering to the third density form the near complete probability for the development of speech taking complete precedence over concept communication or telepathy. We also have the supposition that the so-called opposable thumb was looked upon as an excellent means of intensifying the veiling process, so that rather than rediscovering the powers of the mind, the third density entity would, by the form of its physical manifestation, be drawn to the making, holding, and using of physical tools." Penetrating the veil. The veil is not an all-or-nothing proposition. Rather, Ra confirms that the veil is semi-permeable. The content which does move through the veil from the unconscious to the conscious mind happens in direct connection to the entity's experience and its path. The more that the entity polarizes, the more the veil lifts, and the more polarized catalyst is accepted through. This creates a self-accelerating mechanism. The possible bridges between the deeper mind and the conscious mind include energy transfers of various sorts, shared seeking, meditation, contemplation, prayer, dreams, hypnosis, trauma, and altered states. Perhaps one of the most generally salient mechanisms of communication from unconscious to conscious is the unconscious's response to the seeking, the needs, and the intentions of the conscious mind, particularly when that seeking is undertaken with an other self. In short, the veil can be penetrated. There are many ways to do so. Don asks, what techniques and methods of penetration of the veil were planned, and are there any others that have occurred other than those planned? Ra responds, there were none planned by the first great experiment. As all experiments, this rested upon the nakedness of hypothesis. The outcome was unknown. It was discovered, experientially and empirically, that there were as many ways to penetrate the veil as the imagination of mind-body-spirit complices could provide. In general, we may say that by far the most vivid and even extravagant opportunities for the piercing of the veil are a result of the interaction of polarized entities. Don asks, could you expand on what you mean by that interaction of polarized entities in piercing the veil? Ra responds, we shall state two items of note. The first is the extreme potential for polarization in the relationship of two polarized entities which have embarked upon the service to others path, or, in some few cases, the service to self path. Secondly, we would note that effect which we have learned to call the doubling effect. Those of like mind which together seek shall far more surely find. Don asks, specifically, by what process is the first case when two polarized entities would attempt to penetrate the veil, whether they be positively or negatively polarized, specifically by what technique would they penetrate the veil? Ra responds, the penetration of the veil may be seen to begin to have its roots in the gestation of green ray activity, that all-compassionate love which demands no return. If this path is followed, the higher energy centers shall be activated and crystallized until the adept is born. Within the adept is the potential for dismantling the veil to a greater or lesser extent that all may be seen again as one. The other self is primary catalyst in this particular path to the piercing of the veil, if you would call it that. The veil is the illusion, or it creates the illusion. The illusion isn't so much the existence of the material world, the tree, the river, the human. It is the perception that these manifest things are separate. It is the perception that all is not one, that there is something to fear, something to defend against, etc. Dismantling the veil between the conscious and unconscious minds, which is to say, becoming more aware, is dismantling the illusion itself. And, as mentioned above, the veil is not a construct that has on-off modes only. Rather, Ra describes that dismantlement as happening progressively in degrees in correlation to the self's increasing polarization. Ra said, the veil is shown both somewhat lifted and still present in the tarot card of the Great Way of the Mind. Since the work of the mind and its transformation involves progressive lifting of the great veil betwixt conscious and deep minds, the complete success of this attempt is not properly a portion of third density work and, more especially, third density mental processes. And in this progressive lifting or penetrating of the veil is a dynamic relationship between the conscious and the unconscious minds that is emblematic of a deeply reverent courtship. Ra says, many use the deeper mind as if that portion of mind were a badly used, prostituted entity. Then this entity gains from the great storehouse that which is rough, prostituted, and without great virtue. Those who turn to the deep mind, seeing it in the guise of the maiden, go forth to court it. The courtship has nothing of plunder in its semblance and may be protracted, yet the treasure gained by such careful courtship is great. The positive and negative transformations of the mind may be seen to differ by the attitude of the conscious mind toward its own resources, as well as the resources of other selves. Don asks, there seems to be a book on the priestess's lap, which is half hidden by the robe or material that covers her right shoulder. It would seem that this indicates that knowledge is available if the veil is lifted. However, that knowledge is not only hidden by the veil, but hidden partially by her very garment, which she must somehow move to become aware of the knowledge which she has available. Is this correct? Ra responds, in that the conceit of the volume was not originated by Ra, we ask that you release the volume from its strictured form. Your perceptions are quite correct. The very nature of the feminine principle of mind which, in Ra's suggestion, was related specifically to what may be termed sanctified sexuality is, itself, without addition, the book which neither the feminine nor the male principle may use until the male principle has reached and penetrated in a symbolically sexual fashion the inner secrets of this feminine principle. All robes, in this case indicating the outer garments of custom, shield these principles. Thusly, there is a great dynamic tension, if you will, betwixt the matrix and the potentiator of the mind. Through work and consciousness such as this, the adept may find illumination. Ra says, even the most unhappy of experiences, shall we say, which seem to occur in the catalyst of the adept, seen from the viewpoint of the spirit, may, with the discrimination possible in shadow, be worked with until light equaling the light of brightest noon descends upon the adept, and positive or service to others illumination has occurred. While work through the gateway to intelligent infinity, the indigo ray, is work done through the veil is still present. Contacting intelligent infinity via full penetration of violet ray may be tantamount to the dismantlement of the veil altogether. Ra said, we may not speak of the violet ray transfer except to note that it is an opening to the gateway of intelligent infinity. Indeed, the indigo ray transfer is also this, but, shall we say, the veil has not yet been lifted. The activation, while in yellow ray, of violet ray intelligent infinity is a passport to the next octave of experience. There are adepts who have penetrated many of the energy centers and several of the true colors. This must be done with utmost care while in the physical body, for as we noted when speaking of the dangers of linking red-orange-yellow circuitry with true color blue circuitry, the potential for disarrangement of the mind-body-spirit complex is great. However, the entity who penetrates intelligent infinity is basically capable of walking the universe with unfettered tread. Our vivid post-veil experience. Ra says, it is our perception that such veilless conditions created the situation of a most pallid experiential nexus, in which lessons were garnered with the relative speed of the turtle to the cheetah. The experiences, both good and bad, or joyful and sad, of the mind-body-spirit before veiling would be pale, without vibrancy or the keen edge of interest that such brings in the post-veiling mind-body-spirit complex. Those logoi whose creations have been set up without free will, without the veil, have not, in the feeling of those logoi, given the Creator the quality and variety of experience of itself, as have those logoi which have incorporated free will as paramount by including the veil. The result of these experiments of the veiled mind has been a more vivid, varied, and intense experience of creator by creator. The purpose of polarity is to develop the potential to do work. This is the great characteristic of those, shall we say, experiments which have evolved since the concept of the choice was appreciated. Work is done far more efficiently and with greater purity, intensity, and variety by the voluntary searching of mind-body-spirit complexes for the lessons of third and fourth densities. After the veiling catalyzed two polarized entities in bonding through sexual energy transfer, it was far more likely that higher energy transfers would be sought by this mated pair of mind-body-spirit complexes, thus allowing the creator to know itself with great beauty and wonder. Intelligent infinity having been reached by this sacramental use of this function of the body, each mind-body-spirit complex of the mated pair gained greatly in polarization and an ability to serve. Don asked, why must he come into an incarnation and lose memory, conscious memory of what he wants to do, and then act in a way that he hopes to act? Why? Isn't it possible in between incarnations when he is aware of what he wants to do? Why isn't it possible in between incarnations when he is aware of what he wants to do? Ra responds, let us give the example of the man who sees all the poker hands. He then knows the game. It is but child's play to gamble, for it is no risk. The other hands are known. The possibilities are known, and the hand will be played correctly, but with no interest. In time-space and in fourth density, the hands of all are open to the eye. The thoughts, the feelings, the troubles, all these may be seen. There is no deception and no desire for deception. Thus, much may be accomplished in harmony, but the mind-body-spirit gains little polarity from this interaction. Let us re-examine this metaphor and multiply it into the longest poker game you can imagine, a lifetime. The cards are love, dislike, limitation, unhappiness, pleasure, etc. They are dealt and redealt continuously. You may, during this incarnation, begin, and we stress begin, to know your own cards. You may begin to find the love within you. You may begin to balance your pleasure, your limitations, etc. However, your only indication of other selves' cards is to look into the eyes. You cannot remember your hand, their hands, perhaps even the rules of this game. This game can only be won by those who lose their cards in the melting influence of love. Can only be won by those who lay their pleasures, their limitations, their all upon the table face up and say inwardly, all of you players, each other's self, whatever your hand, I love you. This is the game, to know, to accept, to forgive, to balance, and to open the self in love. This cannot be done without the forgetting, for it would carry no weight in the life of the mind-body-spirit beingness totality. Author's note, vivid. Consider a random daydream that crosses your mind but doesn't compel or grip your attention. Let's say you are imagining having a casual relationship with someone that's not of great interest, or you're adding up some receipts in your head. Now consider the more intense daydream of having a sexual fantasy, spending lottery winnings, envisioning your own death, doing something remarkable, or imagining the revenge you will dish out upon your enemies. Now I hope the last one isn't you, reader, just making sure I cover the bases. How much more vivid, gripping, alive, and powerful is this fantasy relative to the first? This fantasy draws you in, makes you forget your surroundings, fully immerses you into its world, even causes physiological changes in emotions to spike in proportion to the intensity of the fantasy. Now imagine the greatest daydream of all, third density. In this density, we are so thoroughly, so completely mesmerized by this experience that we seem to lose touch with the Creator, to the extent that a lifetime of atheistic materialism becomes a justifiable, palpable reality. We experience profound pain, trauma, and tears. We sink into agony over loss and limitation. We shout with joy in triumph, success, or realization. We bounce with elation when something is gained or suffering is alleviated. We sacrifice everything to help someone, or work hard to realize an ambition, or will ourselves into stoic indifference, or rage bitterly at our misfortunes and the ones perceived responsible for them, or destroy ourselves in desire to escape, avoid, and run away. How passionately we assign permanence and meaning to these manifestations of the One. How intensely we cling to the illusion of separation and suffering. Through the veil and the limitations upon awareness, we convince ourselves that all is not one, all is not well. We believe without question that we are these human identities, that there are a great many things to fear, that we must do something to change our present circumstance in order to find satisfaction, meaning, purpose, joy, and so forth. To me, this is what Ra meant by vivid. Were third density less vivid, it would have less command over our attention and identity. We wouldn't be so pulled, pushed, and compelled. We wouldn't suffer as greatly, but we wouldn't have the impetus to develop will and faith as strongly either. We would be like those pre-veil third density souls who blissed out day and night on the happy bus. A situation where no love is terribly important, no pain terribly frightening, no effort, therefore, is made to serve for love or to benefit from fear. Ours is a dream so utterly vivid that it becomes, for all intents and purposes, reality. Scientifically verifiable, evident and unimpeachable, solid, consensus, fact. So permanent and final that to see beyond it and transcend its limitations requires pure faith. That dream reality is built upon a single core premise, that which Ra calls separation. This lived idea of separation is the root of the individual self and its accompanying afflictions of suffering. But what is the source of separation? It can be traced back to where all things find origin, when infinity becomes aware and splits into subject and object. But after this point, one creation is set into motion. Once creation is set into motion, it is the veil that becomes the factor single most responsible for the rise of the individual, separate I. Only when the self is so thoroughly separated, seemingly, can it live inside a solid seeming identity of its own self-contained and private experience of selfhood, memories, stories, fears, and desires. Only when the vision becomes severely limited by the veil and a vulnerable, mortal, and not entirely self-sufficient I arises, can there be so many causes for suffering. That suffering has vast utility, the Logoi learned, because it catalyzes the development of will and faith. The will to seek and the faith to trust in that which is beyond the veil, that which is not readily seen. On this side of the veil, we within the dream who suffer, who seek truth, who yearn to taste the nourishment of greater reality, seek to penetrate or pierce the veil. As Ra describes it, we seek a source of meaning, identity, love and light that is perceived to be outside the illusion, beyond or higher or deeper than our limited box. From the incarnate perspective, this piercing of the veil is an act of seeing farther, experiencing more, becoming greater, becoming ultimately the creator. From the larger standpoint, the individual who pierces and eventually dismantles the veil is not gaining per se, but letting go of the fiction that it was something other than what it had been all along, the creator. Even in the thickest darkness, the deepest pain, the moments seeming most utterly lost, the individual self was always an illusion, for it had been nothing more nor less than the one creator, infinity in the dance of form. It is only a veil that casts the individual upon a stage of separation. Its piercing and progressive lifting is that which provides we characters upon that stage the most sublime experience of revelation as we discover and rediscover who and what we already are. All right, and thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. I hope you got a lot of value from this episode. I have placed in the description box of this video and in the pinned comment some of my favorite resources for learning more about the Veil of Forgetting, including a great video by Aaron Abke, as well as an in-depth playlist by Scott Mandelker, Ph.D. And with that being said, thanks so much, and take good care of yourself.